Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. In the distant future, humanity had reached an era where the boundaries of the mind could be traversed as easily as walking down a corridor. Dreamscape technology was developed initially as a medical tool to help the body rest and recover from physical exhaustion. But as the years progressed, scientists realized its true potential. The technology could delve deeper into the human mind, allowing people to enter their dreams and, with guidance, confront their innermost fears and traumas. This advancement opened a new field of therapy, and Dr. Nathan Reed had become a pioneer in the practice. Nathan sat in his sleek, minimalist office, his fingertips strumming softly against the smooth glass of his desk. His gaze drifted out the window, watching the distant skyline of New York. Its tall, gleaming towers that scraped the heavens and cast long shadows over the bustling streets below. Dreamscape technology had redefined the way people lived, and Nathan was at the forefront, helping them heal by walking with them through their subconscious minds. But for all the lives he had helped, for all the minds he had guided through the labyrinth of dream worlds, something within him always felt incomplete. Nathan's latest patient was a woman named Eva Harding, a high-profile case with a long history of unresolved trauma. She was in her mid-30s, with dark circles under her eyes, as if sleep had become an unwelcome stranger. Her recurring nightmares were relentless, a shadow that followed her even in her waking hours. Nathan's role, as with so many before her, was to help Eva find the source of that darkness and release it. Eva sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. There was a tense silence between them as she recounted the fragments of her dream, the details sparse but emotionally loaded. "It's always the same," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm in a field. It looks peaceful at first, but then the trees, they start to move. The branches they reach for me, like fingers. I run, but I never get far enough." Nathan nodded thoughtfully, leaning forward slightly. "And the feeling you get when you see the trees moving, what is it?" Eva looked away, her hands tightening. "Fear, helplessness. Like I'm drowning, but I'm still breathing." Nathan clicked on his neural interface, bringing up Eva's dream scan on the transparent display in front of him. The images from her previous sessions were swirling masses of dark, shifting shape as a maze of distorted memories. He could see the threads of her past trauma tangled up in the dream imagery, but they were elusive. There was something more profound lurking beneath the surface, something she had yet to confront. "We're going to go deeper this time," Nathan said, his voice steady. "I'm going to guide you into the dream again, but I'll be more involved. We'll find what's causing this, and we'll face it together." Eva nodded, though her hesitation was palpable. She lay back in the reclining chair, the soft hum of the dreamscape machinery filling the room. Nathan adjusted the interface on her head, the thin neural sensors resting gently against her temples. Then he sat beside her, placing his own device on, a deep breath calming his nerves. It was standard protocol to enter the dream with patience, but there was always an underlying risk of getting too close to the dreamer's trauma could blur the lines between their subconscious and the therapist's zone. "Ready?" Nathan asked, his voice soothing. Eva nodded again, her eyelids fluttering closed. Nathan initiated the sequence, and the world around them dissolved into a blur of colors, sounds, and sensations. The familiar sensation of weightlessness washed over him as the dreamscape pulled them both into its embrace. The field was vast, stretching endlessly in all directions, bathed in an eerie, pale light. The grass beneath their feet swayed softly, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. Nathan glanced at Eva, standing beside him, her expression tense, her eyes scanning the horizon. "This is where it always starts," she murmured. Nathan nodded, his gaze following hers. The field seemed peaceful at first glance, but there was an underlying tension, like the calm before a storm. He could feel it too, the subtle wrongness in the air, as if the dream itself was waiting for something to happen. "Let's walk," Nathan said, his voice low. They moved forward, the grass whispering against their legs as they crossed the open field. The sky above was a muted gray, featureless and cold. Nathan kept his senses alert, knowing that in dreams, danger often manifested suddenly, without warning. As they walked, Nathan noticed the trees in the distance, see tall, dark shapes on the horizon. They loomed like silent sentinels, their branches still and lifeless, but something about them felt ominous. Eva's pace quickened, her breathing shallow. "It's happening," she whispered. "They're going to move." Nathan placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Stay with me, focus on your breathing." But even as he spoke, he saw the movement. The trees, once still and silent, began to stir. Their branches shifted, elongating unnaturally, reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, and a low, rumbling sound filled the air. Eva's panic was palpable, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "They're coming for me. I need to run." Nathan tightened his grip on her shoulder. "We face it this time." The trees moved closer, their twisted forms stretching impossibly long as they reached across the field. The air grew thick with tension, and Nathan could feel the pull of Eva's fear, a dark, suffocating presence that clouded the dream. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself, then opened them again. "This is your dream, Eva. You control it." But even as he said the words, Nathan felt a strange sensation, an unsettling familiarity in the dream. The trees, the sky, the feeling of helplessness. It wasn't just Eva's fear he was sensing. It was his own, a memory, long buried, flickered at the edges of his mind, something he had forgotten or perhaps chosen to forget. The trees loomed closer, their branches reaching out like hands ready to ensnare them both. Nathan's heart raced, his own breathing becoming shallow. He glanced at Eva, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was guiding her or if they were both trapped in a shared nightmare. The branches reached for them, and in a sudden burst of clarity, Nathan grabbed Eva's hand. "Run!" They sprinted across the field, the trees following them, their branches twisting and writhing like serpents. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift and warp, the dream bending to the weight of their fear. Nathan's mind raced as they ran, his thoughts a jumbled mess of confusion and dread. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was the guide, the one in control, but something was wrong. The dream was too vivid, too real. And then, without warning, the ground gave way beneath them. Nathan jolted awake, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was back in his office, the sterile white walls and the hum of the dreamscape machine grounding him. Eva lay beside him, her eyes still closed, her breathing steady. He blinked, trying to shake off the lingering sense of unease. But even as he sat there, he couldn't escape the feeling that something had followed him out of the dream. Nathan sat still for a long moment, his body rigid in the chair, heart still pounding. The dream had been different this time. He'd been inside countless dreamscapes before, but this was something else. His mind drifted to the eerie familiarity, the way the trees had moved, how his own fear had mingled with Eva's. He rubbed his temples, trying to push the unease aside, but the sensation clung to him like a shadow. He glanced at Eva. She was slowly stirring from her session, her brow furrowed as if still caught in the last threads of the dream. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy at first, but gradually sharpening with awareness. She started, her voice hoarse. "I don't know if Nathan leaned forward, his voice calm, but his own thoughts were a storm. "You did well. But I need to know when you saw the trees. Did anything else feel a broken bar familiar to you? Like it wasn't just your fear?" Eva blinked, her confusion palpable. "Familiar? Why?" Nathan shook his head. He didn't want to burden her with his doubts. "Not yet." "Never mind, we'll revisit this later." Eva sat up, looking shaken but more centered than she had before. "I think I saw something. I was running from the trees, but there was a broken bar, something behind them. A shape. I couldn't make it out." Nathan nodded, but inwardly, the conversation barely registered. The dream's haunting quality still rattled him, a feeling that had sunk deep into his bones. He managed to guide Eva through the rest of their session, his professionalism intact, but as she left the office, it felt as though a weight had settled on his chest. He'd always been the observer, the one who ventured into other people's minds, guiding them through their struggles. But now, it was as if his own mind was starting to open, leaking out memories he had long kept sealed. Alone in his office, Nathan ran his hand through his hair and stared out at the dimming city skyline. For years, he'd kept his own trauma buried deep. He had always prided himself on his control. After the accident that had taken his wife and daughter, he'd thrown himself into his work, becoming a leader in dream therapy. He had told himself he was fine, that he didn't need to face what happened. But the dream had rattled something loose. It had awakened a part of him that he had long ignored. Without thinking, he opened the dreamscape system again and began accessing his own neural pathways. He rarely did this, reluctant to turn the technology inward. It was always for others. But tonight, something in him shifted. He needed to know. He needed to face whatever it was that had seeped through in Eva's dream. The machine hummed to life, and Nathan reclined, letting himself drift into the warm embrace of the dreamscape. Nathan stood on a familiar street. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the pavement. He knew this place. It was the street in front of his old house, the house where he had lived with his wife and daughter before the accident. His heart twisted in his chest as he saw the house looming in the distance, its windows dark, the front door slightly ajar. He hadn't been back here since the funeral. He couldn't. The pain had been too much, so he'd shut it away, burying it deep in his mind. But now, here it was, as vivid as the last day he'd seen it. Nathan moved toward the house, his legs heavy with dread. Each step felt like a weight was dragging him down, but he couldn't stop himself. He had to go inside. He had to see. As he reached the front door, a cold breeze swept through him, and he hesitated. The air inside the house felt thick, oppressive. He pushed the door open, and immediately, he was struck by the scent of something familiar, his wife's perfume, lingering in the air as if she had just been there moments ago. His chest tightened. The interior of the house was dim, the furniture covered in shadows. Nathan stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath his feet. His gaze drifted to the staircase, the one that led up to the second floor, to his daughter's bedroom. His breath hitched, but he forced himself to keep moving. He reached the base of the stairs, his hand hovering over the banister. Slowly, he started to ascend. A noisy, faint whisper drifted down from the second floor. Nathan froze, his blood running cold. He strained to listen, but the sound was too faint to make out. His heart pounded in his chest as he reached the top of the stairs. The hallway stretched out before him, long and dark, with only a sliver of light spilling from beneath his daughter's bedroom door. He swallowed hard, his legs trembling as he took a step forward. The whispering grew louder, like someone was just behind the door, waiting for him. Nathan reached for the doorknob, his hand shaking. He turned it slowly, the door creaking as it swung open. Inside, the room was exactly as he remembered it. The pale blue walls, the stuffed animals neatly arranged on the bed, the tiny bookshelf in the corner. But something was wrong. In the center of the room stood a figure, shrouded in shadow. It was small, childlike, but distorted, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Nathan's breath caught in his throat as the figure turned toward him, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. "Daddy?" the figure whispered, its voice thin and distorted. Nathan stumbled back, his mind racing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the figure took another step forward, its voice growing louder, more insistent. "Dad, you're broken bar. Why did you leave me?" Nathan's hands shook, his pulse roaring in his ears. "No, a broken bar, I didn't. You left me," the figure hissed, its voice twisting into something dark, something accusing. "You left us." Nathan's breath came in ragged gasps as the figure loomed closer, its eyes burning with accusation. He backed away, his heart pounding in his chest, but no matter how far he moved, the figure was always there, always just a step away. "You let us die," it whispered, its voice seeping into his mind like poison. "You couldn't save us." Nathan clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. I tried to save you." But the figure didn't relent. It stepped forward again, its voice a low, menacing growl. "You failed." Nathan's vision blurred, his mind spinning as the weight of his guilt crashed down on him. He had buried it for so long, kept it locked away in the deepest corners of his mind, but now it was here, standing before him, accusing him. He fell to his knees, his body trembling, tears burning in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The figure stood over him, its shadow stretching across the room like a dark stain. "You should have saved us," it whispered, its voice soft now, almost gentle. "You should have been there." Nathan closed his eyes, his body racked with sobs. He had spent years running from this moment, from the pain and the guilt. But now, there was no escaping it. For what felt like an eternity, Nathan knelt there, his mind consumed by the weight of his regret. But then, slowly, something shifted. A voice, faint, but familiar, whispered in his mind. "It wasn't your fault." Nathan's breath hitched, his heart pounding. He opened his eyes, and for the first time, the shadowy figure before him seemed smaller, less menacing. "It wasn't your fault," the voice repeated, clearer now. Nathan's chest tightened as he looked at the figure. "I tried to save you," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I didn't leave you." "I didn't." The figure's glowing eyes flickered, and for a moment, it hesitated. Then, slowly, it began to fade, its form dissolving into the darkness until there was nothing left but the faint echo of its voice. "It wasn't your fault." Nathan remained on his knees for a long time, his heart heavy, but lighter than it had been in years. The weight of his guilt had begun to lift, piece by piece, and for the first time since the accident, he felt a sense of peace. He stood slowly, his legs trembling as he moved toward the door. The house around him seemed brighter now, the oppressive darkness fading into the distance. As he stepped outside, the cool breeze brushed against his skin, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he could breathe again. Nathan opened his eyes, back in his office, the dreamscape machine powering down. His chest rose and fell with deep, steady breaths, the remnants of the dream still lingering in his mind. But this time, he wasn't afraid. He had faced his past, confronted the darkness that had haunted him for so long, and though the pain would never fully go away, he knew now that he could move forward. The next morning, Nathan sat at his desk, his hands resting on the cool glass surface. He looked out at the rising sun, the city coming to life below him. He had spent years helping others heal, guiding them through their traumas, but in the end, it was Eva who had helped him. Her dream had opened the door to his own healing, showing him that sometimes, the only way to move forward was to face the things you had long tried to forget. Nathan closed his eyes, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He wasn't just a healer anymore. He was also someone who had been healed. And for the first time in years, that was enough.